following program is brought to you by Baylor College of Medicine in Houston, Texas. For over a century, Baylor has contributed significantly to scientific discoveries through innovation, advancing basic and clinical medical research, with a commitment to enhancing education opportunities for medical and graduate students, primary care and specialty physicians, biomedical scientists, and allied health professionals, and with advancements to improve patient health care and disease prevention.
Distinguished members of the court, we respectfully demand justice. We are Americans. We have a God-given right to choose where and how we will live. The reversal of the Olmstead decision would give states authority to crush our ADA rights to live in the most integrated setting. The reversal of the Olmstead decision would expand states' authority to imprison law-abiding Americans in institutions. This issue is very personal to me. With my disability, I would be in an institution or hospital if I could not afford the services which enabled me to be with my beautiful family. I would rather be dead than to be locked in an institution.
Yeah!
We're here with Mr. Justin Dart, and thank you all for joining us today. Justin, a few questions. First of all, in respect to the Americans with Disabilities Act, as I recall, and I have pretty good memory for this because I was with you, together you and I and two other members of the National Council on Disability took a report to, at the time, Vice President Bush in 1986, January 1986. That report was called Toward Independence. What do you remember specifically about Vice President Bush's reception of that material, of his meeting with us at that time? And I think that was probably the first time that he was exposed to our proposal to have a Civil Rights Act for people with disabilities.
Well, I thought he accepted it positively as he could. On the day after George Will had bashed him in the Washington Post and called him an idiot. And I thought he was very gracious and that he showed a real interest in it.
And when we left that meeting, as I recall, he said he couldn't promise too much and reminded us that he was just the vice president. Did you think much about that statement after we left?
Well, I did. I certainly did. I supported him pretty vigorously for president.
And were you surprised when he became president about the comments he made with respect to equal opportunity for people with disabilities?
Yes, I was pleasantly surprised because I had been working for President Reagan and I had observed other presidents, and I had never heard a presidential candidate or a president say that people with disabilities ought to have civil rights. I was surprised.
And did that inspire you to be more of a leader in the disability movement?
In a way, and it certainly inspired me to work harder to get Vice President Bush elected president.
And when he was elected, in the inaugural speech, he made a commitment to the ADA, as I recall.
Yes.
You were probably moved by that.
Certainly was.
And as a result of that, the ADA, and not a result of that statement, but partly a result of the leadership that the president played at that time, the ADA was passed, and he signed it on July the 26th, 1990. But in retrospectively, what role did George Bush play in the passage of the Americans with Disabilities Act?
I think he played the role. I think he played the Abraham Lincoln role. I think that he very possibly was not in the majority in his own party about favoring the ADA, and it was him and Boyd Gray and Dick Thornburgh and a couple of others. And I think if it hadn't been for his constant, courageous leadership and insistence, that the law would not have passed. By the way, I could make the same statement about you.
Justin, the Bush Medal was created by you and others at the end of President Bush's term. What exactly does the Bush Medal mean?
Well, I guess we each have our own conception of it, but my perception of the Bush Medal is recognition of truly historic progress, international progress, to the rights and empowerment of 1 billion people with disabilities. And President Bush, who had spearheaded and signed the first civil rights for people with disabilities in the history of the world, certainly deserved to have the medal named after him and receive the first medal.
And if you were to characterize today George Bush's role with respect to the history of the disability movement, where would you rank him?
Well, it's hard to say would I rank him number 1 or number 2, or I never thought about that. But I think that Evan Kemp called him the Abraham Lincoln of people with disabilities, and I think he was.
Who else at that time really demonstrated courage in getting the ADA passed?
Well, of course, Dick Thornburgh and Jenny Thornburgh and Lex Frieden and Evan Kemp and Pat Wright, and Paul Marchand, and Liz Savage, and Hy Feldblum, and Ralph Nace, and there was a lot of them. I think there was probably a handful, maybe 5 people that, without whom I think, without even one of them, that, like yourself, that it would not have passed.
And in the Congress, there was some real
Oh
committed
yeah,
leaders.
Tom Harkin, Bobby Silverstein. Bobby Silverstein is, wrote the final draft of the law. I think he's an absolute genius. He's an equal of a Thomas Jefferson.
Tony Coelho,
Tony Coelho,
Lowell Weicker.
and Lowell Weicker. I think Harkin was special, and Kennedy was good, and
Major Owens.
Major Owens was the one who taught me about empowerment, and the one that sponsored the task force that went all over the country promoting ADA, where we went to every state, and there was
Steny Hoyer.
Steny Hoyer and Senator Hatch, who you and I met at your insistence the night before he cast a historic vote, and he did not. After we talked to him, he did not cast the vote the way he had intended to, and he cast it for ADA, and I was quite moved by that. And there was a lot of heroes, plenty of heroes.
Justin, last night we had the experience of going to the Supreme Court building here in Washington, D.C. And there we observed 100 advocates, people with disabilities, different types of disabilities, holding hands, singing empowerment songs, lighting candles, and committing themselves to spend the night on the steps of the Supreme Court, awaiting the hearing about the Olmstead case, where two people with disabilities have been, in effect, sued by the state of Georgia, who wants to put them in an institution as opposed to have them live in the community. Justin, you came and spoke to that group, and you had some important things to say, but in general, why do you do things like that? Why do you leave the confines of your hospital bed and your warm home and safe haven to go out on a cold night with a group of people who are, some would say, radical, and share time, words, part of yourself with them? Why do you do that?
Because I think that we're fighting a battle for democracy that is just as important as any war that any soldier ever died in. And I believe that literally. And if we can, Abraham Lincoln led us to war, and hundreds of thousands of people died on the very same issue, and I think he was right. And now we're fighting the same war, but fortunately without guns. But I don't think it's any less important. And if I'm going to die on the Supreme Court steps with those great folks, I couldn't think of a more ideal way to go.
Is there anything about the ADA that you're disappointed in? Has there been any developments since the passage of the ADA that have discouraged you, or that have frustrated you, or have?
Well, I'm disappointed that to have learned more and more and more about the far right in our country, the people who would like to destroy ADA and affirmative action and civil rights and federal authority and go back to pre-Civil War America. But as far as ADA itself is concerned, and the people who passed it and the people who will continue to support it, not the least of which is President Clinton, that I am surprised at how well it's going and how many Americans accept it, and how hard the Justice Department and our people in our movement fight for it. And it's going better than I ever thought it would.
And do you think it's destined to survive and prosper as a law, as a statement of principle in the United States, or do you think that we're subject to the pendulum swinging to a more conservative time, or a different viewpoint on these issues, where people with disabilities once again will be the subjects of somebody else's control?
Well, I think so far we're winning the fight to support and expand ADA. I've read enough history books to know that you don't take anything for granted. Some of the greatest cultures in history have got to what seemed almost to the threshold of the promised land, and then they started taking it easy and got self-indulgent and disunited and went down the hill. Now, I think what will happen is what we make happen. If we keep fighting like we are now, we keep having the kind of good leadership in government that we have now, I'm optimistic. But I don't think it's automatic. I have no illusion that, you know, the Marxists always said the victory was inevitable. No, I have not that illusion.
But at one point, you and I were in Williamsburg, Virginia, and we were in the first. We were together there in the first. I guess that was a House of Parliament, or the first.
Yeah, where the Virginia legislature used to meet in the colonial days.
Yeah. And at one point we were looking at some historical document there, and I think we both got the sense that that the ADA was bound to happen. I mean, we did get a feeling of inspiration there, and came to a sort of shared belief that ADA could be passed and it would be law.
Well, I have a little different memory of it. I remember you and I sitting there in silence. And then there wasn't anybody else in there. It was the winter time. Remember, it was cold as the devil. And there's just not a lot of tourists down there. In this place where our forefathers and mothers had sat and decided to risk having their heads cut off, literally, in order to go out and fight for democracy. And we had been told, and we knew it was true, that we were risking our positions of leadership and jobs by supporting this ADA. We'd been told that, and we knew it was true. And I'm not so sure I ever arrived at a conclusion that we were going to win, but the conclusion that I did arrive at, when you and I were sitting there, and the same one that I know you arrived at, was that we wouldn't be able to look ourselves in the mirror if we didn't take the torch from our revolutionary forefathers and try to take democracy this one significant step further. And whether we got fired or not.
That's true.
And obviously, I think part of that was thinking it was not a totally insane risk. You know, that we had that there was a probability, a decent probability that we could carry it off. But we knew we were taking risks.
That's true.
And I'll never forget that. It was one of the great inspirational times in my life when you and I were sitting there absorbing that history and thinking about our own responsibility in the light of that history.
Justin, if you had the opportunity to speak to every person with a disability who's about to graduate from high school now, and share with them some inspirational thought or some credo, what would that be?
Well, I'd say empower yourself, empower the world. Get into the politics of empowerment as if your life depended on it, because they do, and the lives of your children and your grandchildren.
And that, you would say that to anyone, not just somebody graduating from high school.
Oh yeah, rich, poor. I'm not just talking about poor people or minorities or disabled people.
Change the subject for just a minute. If you look at what this nation has done in research as it relates to people with disabilities, and particularly as it relates to people involved in the independent living movement, what would you say has been the primary contribution of research to independent living, and what would you say is the promise of research to independent living in the future?
Well, I think research has confirmed that independent living philosophy, along with the science of medicine, along with the science of rehabilitation, but the philosophy and inspiration of independent living, taking over your own life, I think it has created miracles in the lives of people, what would have been considered miracles, at least before, in the same sense that the electric light was once considered a kind of miracle, and it has opened up a whole new frontier in the outer space of human relations. People, not just for people with disabilities, people we had stereotyped and we had thought that could never do this or that or this, and now they're doing 10 times as much as we even hoped for. And
the promise of research to independent living, the future, what has to be done in the field of research to promote more growth in the movement for independent living?
Well, I think we have to do enough research to show people that so-called miracles or these explosions of empowerment and success consistently occur when you do the right thing, and that it's the best investment humanity ever made. Independent living is the basis of my empowerment philosophy.
And you've actually run an independent living program for many years.
Yeah, in the home here, yeah.
Your family?
I've never written about that, but for 30 years, yeah. So I think if people who just sit in ivory towers and preach about things, they lose touch with reality. Well, we have the reality of independent living and empowerment 365 days a year for 30 years. So we stay in pretty good touch with with what the real people have to deal with in real life. We know what happens when you call Social Security or the Immigration Service and you're not a senator or you're not the president.
Now, do you think that's a perfectly rational kind of approach to life that you've taken in that regard? Many people would say if they had the means intellectually, physically, economically to be self-supporting, to be retired and clipping coupons, as they say, that they would do some degree of volunteer work and travel and explore on their own and so on. You've chosen not to do those things. You've chosen to instead live like many ordinary people live, to use the means that you have, again, intellectual, physical, economic, to benefit others all the time, not just part of the time. It's not a hobby with you, it's a lifestyle. Is that a perfectly rational decision that you've made with your life?
Oh, I think it absolutely is, and I don't think there's anything generous or unselfish about it, because I think I'm happier doing this. I think I'm physically better off. I think to the extent that I can help empower other people, they turn back and empower me, and they empower other people, and the level of humanity goes up. Now, I have no illusion that I'm changing history in the sense that our book claimed that George Washington or Julius Caesar or X superhero changes history, but that one little drop in the bucket that makes the difference. That's what fills the bucket up, you see. And no, I think that I'm living the most luxurious life that I could possibly live. I claim no virtue of sacrifice or being an ascetic or anything of that nature.
And Justin, more than a year ago now, some of the finest doctors in the world told you that you were destined to die within a matter of days, not weeks, but days, as I recall.
That's right, yeah.
And yet you're here with us today. Your last night in the steps of the Supreme Court, rainy, cold night in Washington. Tomorrow, I know you have a full schedule. You know, some would say, how can you be doing these things? You're supposed to be dead right now. You're supposed to be in a hospital if you're not, and yet you're in your own home.
I'm supposed to be in the hospital, and there came a point last year after I'd been in the hospital for 9 days, and they told me that science had pretty well shot its wad and that my heart was not going to get better, but that they had plenty of good machines there to keep me going, you know, and keep me comfortable. And I said, no thanks, I'm going home. And they said, you can't go home, you'll just die. And I said, well, I'm going to die someplace, and I'm going to die at home doing my politics, you see. And I just left. And you may recall I did a little writing about it. And I said, this is a matter of conscience. And fortunately, I can afford to go home. Other people can't. And because I got this beautiful, family to help me. And frankly, I think that's what has kept me alive instead of killing me like the doctors thought. That it's what has kept me alive, this passion to live one more day and go to one more rally and write one more paragraph in the Power book. And today, I didn't feel too good when you came to start this interview. Now I feel 10 times better because we're sitting here doing revolution, you see. And I think I'm the luckiest guy in the world to be able to associate with people like you. And I think it keeps me alive.
Well, Justin, on behalf of myself and all of our colleagues, all people, I want to thank you for your contributions, for your witness to independent living, for your leadership in civil rights, and for the many, many contributions to improving quality of life that you've made for me and millions of others. Thank you.
Well, I say the same thing to you, Lex.
I want to thank Justin Dart. We're here in Washington, D.C., in the home of Justin Dart, one of the real leaders of this century and the next, I believe.
The Sierra Club recommends lowering the maximum contaminant level in fluoride in drinking water from the present 4 milligrams level, shown not to harm... whatever. Screw that. Let's get this. Basically, the Sierra Club wants the citizens to be able to vote on this. They want to give people